So this is, sort of the introductory session to smart cities. The idea is to have a critical discussion. We will make, Maxime will start, and then, I will follow, and we will sort of present where we are in our thinking about smart cities. So the idea really is that you participate, you criticize, you have read the readings, and then on Wednesday we would continue, going more into the readings, your presentations, maybe cognitive, how we want to go further from here. But it's really sort of to set the stage about the concept of smart cities.
So we present the framework, and then during the 2 weeks, it's very good if you can take the framework and try to think with the framework. So we all think the same way, and we can think together.
Yeah, but you think critically. It's not. We don't want you to. It's not a one-way street that we tell you how to think. But we hopefully, we have been thinking about these things for a long time, and we want to share it with you, but we're of course also open to changes and improvements, but
yeah. Okay. So I think you are all aware of this, and this is why you are in the room, but just to give you a little bit of context, so urbanization is happening. Over 50% of the world population lives in urban areas. It was 54% in the last UN report from 2014. In 2050, it will be 70% of the world population, and 30 so-called megacities, over 10 million inhabitants by 2025. So
you get the slides. You couldn't keep all the slides. We'll give you all the slides.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
So urbanization is happening, and this comes with unprecedented challenges. So especially when it comes to infrastructure services, energy, transport, communication, water, housing, waste management, greens, that we call the first layer infrastructure, and the second layer infrastructure, the health, education, culture. You're getting more and more people into cities, and you have to adapt the infrastructure to this unprecedented pressure that is happening. The sustainability of urban systems is also at stake, because this pressure is a growing pressure, and if nothing is done, it's not going to end very well for everyone. So cities, which we call agglomerations and metropolitan areas, are increasingly left alone while facing these challenges. So cities are, from one hand, the problem, because it's putting more and more pressure, and we have to deal with that, but it's also the solution. Because of cities and people living together in the same system, we can have economies of scale and solve the problem in a better way than if we had people spread all over.
So maybe I explain a little bit more, for the ones who are the first time here. So, I'm a political scientist originally, working in the engineering world, but for me it has become clear that the traditional nation state is no longer the relevant entity. I think, it has been a relevant entity for plenty of things, for the period of industrial development and wars and everything, but for the kind of challenges we have today, population growth, urbanization, ecological problems, I am not sure that the nation state is the right entity to tackle these problems. And that's really where, and that's not, political scientists don't think like this. For them, this is not normal thinking. But I'm pretty convinced today that the type of challenges that we face, that humanity faces now, cannot really be addressed by the traditional nation state. We need new entities, and then what is the new entity? I don't see any other entity than the city, the agglomeration, the metropolitan. That's where the problems will be. the problems are not at the nation state level. There you have some abstract problems of growth and statistics and things like that. But the concrete problems where people live will be in cities. And that's also where we have to think how to address these problems. And that's, you know, sort of the beginning. When I thought about IGLUS, this was the beginning of the thinking. We are making the city, or whatever we talk later, the agglomeration, the metropolitan area, a new relevant entity for collective problem solving. That's the background of everything. And sorry, left alone. And the governments are not really helping the cities, you know. I mean, it's I think the cities are pretty much on their own to deal with these big challenges. The things are dumped on the cities, people migrate there, you know, the unemployment is there. I mean, when there are problems with unemployment, people migrate to the city, you know, and so the cities have to face all these challenges, and the national government is not really going to help the cities. And so I think that's the background of why we are interested in this topic and why we want to really make a difference in this area. And that, of course, raises the question of governance. How do we govern these complex systems to find solutions to the kind of challenges that the cities are facing? So this is the first slide. This is sort of the big picture why we are interested in what we are doing.
Yeah, because one of the main characteristics of urban system is complexity. And as Matthias said, when you say that the nation state is no longer the relevant entity, you have a paradigm switch from government to governance. And this is pretty much valid in cities. Because of the actors that you find in the urban system that have to be brought around the table and concerned when taking decisions.
That does not mean that maybe we can have just we have 2.5 hours to discuss. So that does not mean, you know, I'm not saying the nation state is disappearing. You know, the nation state will be there. There are many people working at that level. There are many things going on at the national level. But I think for the type of challenges that we have now, you know, I think the city is a better entity to address these challenges. I think the nation state was very good when it was about defending the territory, go to war, invest into industrial development, you know, all kind of development policies, all things. But we already see, I mean, many of the problems that we are facing today, environmental problems, climate change, all these things, the nation state is just not there addressing these kind of problems. I think the nation state was there. It was very good for development, you know, sort of traditional economic development. But the type of challenges we have now are more complex than that. Of course, we still need development. But I think the cities have to come up with some new, and that raises, I mean, somebody made the remark this morning, you know, this is totally interdisciplinary. And the group is interdisciplinary, and the problems are interdisciplinary. They are no longer simply disciplinary problems. You need to combine, you know, technology with policy, with economics, with citizen engagement and all that. And that calls for another type of kind of, and that's what we are trying to do. We're bringing the different elements that are needed to address these challenges together. So if you have any comments, and you know, maybe for the ones who hear this the first time, but
yeah, I totally agree with you, sir, regarding that, because the governance and the governance, there is a big difference between both of them. We need governance, but it could be it's not necessarily be government by the governance.
Yeah.
It could be private, it could be company.
Exactly. So the private sector plays a much more active role. The citizens play a much more active role. You know,
and this, with this related issues, and keep changing it by time,
yeah.
as you know. And I my own belief or my own perspective that it will lead to deficiencies of the governance work. because, as you say, it's the national governance entity. They have a lot of things to deal with, more than there is a problem of this area for pollution or something like that. They want interest to deal with that sort of things. They are more interested to deal with something with the national.
Yeah. But you are from a country where the city and the nation state are still very close together. I mean, the city is almost, but you know, if we take a country like Switzerland, you know, which is totally fragmented, we have, I mean, the nation state entity does not really make sense, you know, in light of these new challenges. And I think that's the case for many of the countries. I mean, like Brazil, you know, where, I mean,
Yes,
put
but-
everybody together into, I mean, it's the language that makes the link, but historically.
Yes, but the unity is different from Switzerland, is different from
Oh, absolutely,
Spain.
absolutely.
We don't have those difference, for instance. We have cultural difference, but the national state, and the state government and the city hall and the city government that has their specific role. I agree with you that the challenges is going to be tackled by the city.
Yeah.
But tell that the national administration will lose the power, I think it depends on the country. For Switzerland, I totally agree. For Spain, maybe. For Brazil, I can't see like this now. But I agree, to tackle the city.
Because it's actually contradictory when you say that cities are being left alone, but then the national government is going to lose importance. Maybe it's all about reinterpreting the national government and not.
I agree.
Because actually, if they're left alone, who's going to come for them? It has to be the national government. So it's not about national government losing relevance. It's maybe about reinterpreting the role of the relationship, and it's all about governance between the national government and the cities. But then there's because the role of the national government, and this is something that bugs me, and I'm here in IGLUS studying the challenges of large urban systems, and yes, and how we deal with the challenges. But it's a question from day one, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer it after 5 modules, but it's still something that I'm going to have at the back of my head. So instead of why of treating the symptoms, like the problems, why is there not, and maybe it's a national level thing, a whole study of how to stop the symptoms? Like, why are we only trying to solve large megalopolis and this type of thing? And why are we not, I know it's impossible to answer because it's just a phenomenon that happens, but I'm sure that, and maybe some countries have been more successful than others because of cultural differences, but why are we only tending to the symptoms and not the causes? Like, why are we not also studying national government measures to try to stop the creation of these large urban systems? Like, for example, the case in Italy, those are some of the less famous troubled cities. It's just because that they're not that big, and it's not that Italy is unpopulated, it's just that they have like 30, 500,000 cities, and they think of themselves as cities. I come from Latin America. If you are not over 1 million, it's not a city. So, yeah, it's something in the back of my head, like, because the IGLUS, and I agree, it's the urgency now, how we treat the symptoms, like the problems with infrastructure. But hey, shouldn't we also start thinking on, okay, how do we kind of stop this megalopolis from forming? Maybe.
Okay, no, it's a good point. I think we have to keep that. I mean, we have to keep that in mind, I mean, I don't know how to address this now, but we'll take this question and sort of. No, I'm not saying that national policies are not important, but somehow I have the impression that, and you know, that might be our own bias, okay? And you know, we're not, I mean, we're trying to have a global program, so it never does justice to everything, and maybe we are too European-centered, or I don't know what, you know. We try not to, but you always have your own biases. But I think that the philosophy behind it, and that is very American actually, we are extremely pragmatic, you know, in a sense, and that's not European, you know, in the sense, okay, you know, these things happen, it would be good not to, we know that we should do differently, you know, but they will still happen, we will still have more megalopolis, we will have, you know, these kind of things, and then at some point we come to the point where we have to deal with the problems, and that's a purely pragmatic kind. It's not, so we're not promoting, we really don't want to have an ideological view on this, you know, and this should be good and this should not be that. I mean, we know green would be better, we know that, you know, less CO2 would be better, we know that more economic growth, we all know that, but at the end, you will just be faced with problems, with immigration into the city, with joblessness, with and I also think that there are, maybe that's another one, there are more, once we go down to the urban level, we have more similarities across the world than when we stay at the national level, okay? The national, immediately people say, but Brazil is really totally different from Mexico, you know, things like that. But once we talk about megalopolis, big cities, okay, we more or less have the same problems. Of course, there are cultural differences and all that, but it's the same technology, it's the same, it's transport, it's jobs, you know. So that's a little bit the bet that we are doing. There are actually a lot of similarities where we can learn. Of course, you cannot take the Korean and tomorrow implement it in Madrid, but you know, it's the same technology, it's the same companies, it's the same vendors, but I take your point. I think that's something we should, but there are, I mean, in my view, you see, there are countries already where the national government is totally dysfunctional, useless, okay? Of course, they want to stay in power, but because that is jobs and politicians and all that, but there's not much value added, actually.
I can support that idea, nation state, losing importance idea. In Turkey, for example, Istanbul, you know, Istanbul is like 50% tax revenue and 50%
GDP.
all GDP comes from Istanbul, and you know, because of that, the mayor of Istanbul has so much power, and now he's asking for a special legislation for Istanbul from the nation state. And for example, according to the rules of protocol, you know, he shouldn't be at the same level as a minister, but in the events, he only shows up when there is a prime minister. So this is something like not decided, not like put yet, but yeah, it's happening.
So it's something we have to debate and think about, and you know, there is, I mean, this is, the good thing about our program is also that we don't have to have the definitive answer, and you know, and we are really not trying to impose our view and say, look, man, you know, I'm more right than you and things like that, but and we're trying to learn from each other. But I think it's a relevant question, and we came across this question, the relationship between the national government and the city, and it's very different from one country to, I mean, in a country like Korea or Turkey, where one city is, you know, already half of the country, it's totally different from Germany or so, where you have all these cities and none of which is really big enough to call this. So there are huge differences from one country to the other. Yeah.
I think I'm agree with you. I think that this local metropolitan point approach, it's there to tackle with local metropolitan problems. It's a way to maybe, can I say, tailor the governments, the different relationship between the entities So these cities are like forcing to change this national.
I personally, then we move on, but I personally think, I mean, and as I told you, I started out in political science. That's in Germany, it's even called political science. It's called national, state science. It's not called, So I mean, that's at least clear. And I do think today that many of the cities are more innovative, more creative than the national level. There is more dynamics at the city level than at the national level. I mean, you can see it. All the international relations and all that, the UN, all these things are more or less blocked. The minutes you can get out of that, then you get into quite interesting, when the mayors meet, when all this, you get into more interesting dynamics.
Sometimes the nation is a problem for the local cities.
That's what she's saying, exactly.
It's a fence to jump. So maybe you cannot do things because the nation laws are against the things that you're trying to do.
And for me, this has, I mean, without any value, I think the nation state was made at the time, for a different time. Somehow we have shifted, I mean, and in my view, we have had a fantastic period of industrial development and growth and all that, and the nation state was a perfect instrument for that. But I think now, I mean, this development has created all kind of problems, and we have new challenges, and suddenly it's as if this is not necessarily, it's still there, and the laws have been made for that, but somehow we have new challenges for which we don't really have the appropriate instruments, and that's why we're focusing on the urban area.
Don't you think that probably giving more power to these mega cities could be a thing that can separate more the big cities to make an economic jump and make that the small cities of the same country can be poorer?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying this is necessarily a good evolution, maybe the big cities will become very powerful and the mayor of Istanbul will be more important than the prime minister at some point. It's a matter of the, but then there are all these other cities that are left on the side that don't have the resources, that, and then, then what happens to them? But as you say, I mean, that's where the big problems are today. Now, everybody else, I mean, I was the other day, just to give this example, I was in Murmansk, but I went to Rovaniemi. It's a Finnish city, the most northernmost Arctic city, 50,000 inhabitants, okay, 5,000 refugees, Syrian refugees, okay, within 3 months.
Oh, I agree.
What do they do? I mean, and that's a global phenomenon. I mean, they're totally local, and suddenly they have to deal with this kind of global problems, 10% of the population.
I mean, I do, actually that's the reason why I'm sitting here. There's other problems today, and that they should be tackled, and I completely agree that the strategy should be like a city-based city. I mean, it's as you said, you don't have to deal with the hurdles of the national government. I mean, most of the time you do, but still, it's like a hands-on, first-person experience of how to tackle. But my question, and it's just, as you said, it's not such a practical question, it's more of a philosophical question. It's like, what about next? And it's all of these things about mega cities getting too much power and then the split bit. I mean, it's just, is there, besides tackling the now, like the problems of right now, is there, and I can't help but always try to connect, and you keep saying that the national government has lost its importance, which is true, and it will happen even more so, but it's not that it's obsolete, it's just that maybe it has to be redefined.
I take your point. I mean, maybe now the cities will force the national governments to evolve, because they need to evolve.
Yes.
No, but I think that it's good to be aware of this, but there is still quite a long way to go. So maybe you know about Habitat 3, which is the UN COP21 for urban. So it's all about urban, and cities are not invited to talk. It's still the governments that are defining, it's still the national government that are defining the new urban agenda.
Yeah.
And because the whole UN stuff is obsolete. I mean, if we still have having to do. So this is one thing, and then Ricardo, the other thing you were mentioning about how do we always come too late and just handle the problem when the problem is here. It's one thing we were seeing in Istanbul. So Istanbul, we were focusing on resilience, which is the capacity of a city to absorb a shock and recover from this. And how urban practitioners understand resilience in Turkey, they understand disaster management. So you are trying to say that you have to plan before the disaster happens so you don't get totally destroyed when it happens. And people say, yeah, when there is a disaster, there is the car coming and the ambulance is here, So it's good to be aware of that the shift is needed to have a more long-term planning vision, but in the reality, and this is why we're here and we're talking, and it's very good, but in the reality, still a long way to go.
Okay, let's take the next step, but I think it's a good, sort of a setting the stage a little bit for the discussion. Okay.
So the agenda, we start by presenting our conceptualization of the city as a system. So for some of you, you will hear it again. We presented this in Dubai and Istanbul, but for the new ones, this is really our brand. For us, the city is a social-technical system, and we really try to think in a systematic way when it comes to what happens in the city. From this conceptualization of the city as a system, we derive 3 performance dimensions that are resilience, efficiency, and sustainability, and it's directly coming from the definition of systems, so from system theory. Then we make the link between governance of urban infrastructures and performance of the urban systems. So as I explained in the first session, we have these 3 performance dimensions, and Seoul is about efficiency. And actually, smart city is a way to become more efficient. This is how we understand it. Smart city is not an end in itself. It's really the mean to become more efficient. So then we present different definitions about smart city, our own vision of the phenomenon. And from that, so we start governance and performance, then performance, that is efficiency and smart city, and then governance of smart cities. Okay? And then I hope we have a good discussion.
Yeah, but you interrupt at any time.
Yeah, just feel free to. So as Jesus was saying, we were discussing, but traditional approach to cities is most of the time is very disciplinary. You have urban planners, you have transportation planners, architects, geographers, economists, political scientists, and public administrators. So for a long time being, these people have been thinking in their field and not taking the others so much into
Transportation
consideration.
engineers, energy engineers, water engineers.
So it's really silo thinking, and what we try to promote here is a much more integrative system approach. And what we also want you to acquire is more skills in what you don't know. I mean, if you are a transportation engineer, of course, you want to know everything about transport in Seoul and how the BRTs run in Mexico, these kind of things. But as we will see, all the different urban infrastructures are interconnected and interrelated. And if you just focus on transportation and don't understand what's happening in the energy system, the water system, the housing system, you're going to get short on something. So
Our strength, sorry, we do this together.
Yeah.
But our strength is we don't want to make you better transport engineers. I mean, you don't have to come here for this. This is not. There are very good programs that go. I mean, many people ask us, then what are you teaching really? What is this really about? And I think we want to show you this systems approach. We want to show you the complexity of it, how it is linked, and not just say, okay, this is too complicated, we cannot deal with it. You know, I mean, we would like to have a more systemic way of looking at things, and then you're still going to be the transport expert or the energy expert, but from a more integrated perspective. That's basically the. But this is what we see. I mean, we are at EPFL, you know, and then we have people who call themselves, I mean, we have an urban institute, we have urban, everything, and then we go and look, and, you know, some are architects that really are interested in nice, fancy buildings, okay? Which is good, but that's not the urban system, you know? And so, they all exist next to each other, don't talk to each other, but I think when you are confronted with the problems, you need to look at these things in an integrated.
Yeah, I mean, for the transportation engineer, I mean, at the end of these 2 years, you're not good, we don't pretend that you will know perfectly water, energy, whatever, but you will be just able to think that there are other things to be considered when taking a decision, and you will be able to talk to this guy. So maybe promote more cross-fertilization and break silo thinking. Okay, so we go a little bit into the theory now. So as we said, we looked into the system theory to conceptualize cities. So one of the father of system theory is Akhoff, that defines a system as composed of two or more interrelated elements of any kind. Okay, so a system is not an ultimate indivisible element, but it's a whole that can be divided into parts, into interrelated parts. Okay? So you have three main characteristics. First one is that the properties of behavior of each element of the set have an effect on the properties of behavior of the set taken as a whole. So a good analogy is the human body. Every organ in a living body affects its overall performance. If your performance is to run at a certain speed limit, it's not going to be just the result of your knees. It's going to be the result of your muscles that are alimented, your heart that is pumping blood, your lungs that are taking air from outside. So therefore, no part has an independent effect on the whole, and each is affected by at least one other part. So as I said, the heart and the lung is a good example. And the whole cannot be decomposed into independent subsystems. If you just take my legs out of my body, it's not really functional. So a system cannot be subdivided into independent subsystems. It's really the idea of a system is made of interrelated elements. And if you look at the city, it's really what's happening into the city. So a city is composed of different subparts that we consider being the city infrastructures. So you have the water infrastructure. So we define 5 main infrastructure. This is generally what's written in the literature, which is water and wastewater, energy, in which we also include solid waste, transportation, housing, and green infrastructure. These are the main 5 infrastructures. And these are all sub-parts of your overall system. And each of these sub-parts is itself a system. If you look at the water infrastructure, you have water production units, household consumption units, you have pipes of different diameters, different flow rates. And if you take out the production unit, the whole is falling apart. So the city is composed of, it's a system of systems. This is how we brand it.
Okay, maybe we can have a little discussion here. So I mean, this system, people criticize it. I mean, systems, first of all, it's an analogy. You know, it's not, I mean, it's not, the city is not naturally a system. We have a picture, we have a certain way, and the analogy is maybe a little bit organic, you know, it's sort of a biological analogy. The thing is like an organism, and so it is important to acknowledge that we are talking about an analogy. And people criticize that. People say, yeah, that's a nice picture you have of the city, but it's not practical, you know, I mean, and other people criticize it for being too, how do you say, aseptic, you know, too clean, not political, not economic, no interests, no, you know, it's sort of a, it's a technical analogy of how things function. And I think we are aware of the limitations of systems theory, too abstract, you know, but on the other hand, I don't think there is anything better, you know, I mean, what would be the other analogy you could use? So it's not because it's fantastic, but it's everything else is less good.
Like democracy.
Yeah, something like this, you know, and that's, I think we have to be aware of that. It's sort of it's a little bit a technocratic kind of view, you know, it's not a political view, it's not an aesthetic view, you know, it's a little bit technocratic, I mean, and you can criticize it for that, but what's that? Google is watching on me. And so, you know, that's sort of the image we work with, and there's a lot of literature on that. You mentioned STS, the Science Technology Society, or this socio-technical system. I mean, that socio-technical system, we say that there is technology, but there are also human beings, and that they interrelate. But even for society, it's a little bit a technocratic view how everything functions. So I just wanted you to be aware of the limitations of that analogy. But on the other hand, I would defend it, because what else should we use to talk about cities, to do justice to that complexity? But that's open for discussion. I mean, when I talk about art with architects, I mean, they hate this, or they hate systems thinking. You know, they said, okay, we have, you know, nice building. Okay, they relate to each other, but it's not really a system. It's, I don't know what you.
I have a question here in this concept of socio-technical, political, or political, where the environmental goes.
Very good point. Okay, so sometimes, very good point. Sometimes, that's another weakness. Sometimes we use the word, or some people use the word, socio-technical ecological systems. And because it's not, I mean, that's the limit of that view, because there is a biophysical basis on which this, I mean, the water comes from somewhere, the food comes from somewhere, the energy comes from somewhere. It's not just, the technical system by itself does not produce energy, you know, that you need something you need a physical, biophysical basis. So sometimes it's a very good remark. I mean, I don't have it here, but we do conceptualize, and so there is an ecological system, you know, where the water, I mean, yes, we have, and then we have a technological system on the basis of the ecological system. Water is pumped, cleaned, and then discharged again in the environment. And then on top of that, we have a social system, not political, but the social. But there are human beings, there are interests, there are actors, so you really have the three. But this literature, STS, neglected, this is something out of the 70s, 80s, last century, neglected very much the ecology. I think we cannot, when we talk about sustainability later, we'll see that, I mean, just to anticipate, we say the city as a system is part of a larger system, because most of the things for the city still come from outside of the city, okay? And so you cannot totally neglect that part, okay?
Well, there's another part of the analogy which I do understand and I share it and it makes sense, but it's only talking about the physical part of the city. The city has a dimension which is just intangible, which is the human dimension. So when you think of a system of systems, it's like talking about the human body without talking about the mind or the person. I mean, talking as a city about a system of systems like water and transportation, yeah, but where's the human factor, the intent? Humans are tangible, but I mean the not physical part of the city, the people, which obviously plays into this.
The culture, the ideas.
Yeah, the social part of this. Again, it's like talking about the human body without talking about the mind or the soul or something. I mean, it makes no sense.
I think, just to make a point, so this, as you said, we focus on the physical infrastructures, but these physical infrastructures are social-technical systems. So when we study the transportation system, we don't just study how the buses run or how the smart card is implemented, but there is, in social-technical, so you have technical and you have the social part, which deal with all the habits, for example, of the people taking transportation, their willingness to shift from the car to the shared mobility mode. So when we study
the history, you know, it has been built by humans. I mean, it didn't just happen. The transportation system has a history. You know, it was built there and not there. This bus was bought and not another type of bus. We built roads and not metro. You know, I mean, so the social is always, the technical is already the embodiment of the social somehow.
No, I'm not saying that it's being taken out of the equation in the course. I'm just saying that the definition of a city as a system of systems falls short in the sense that it doesn't quite capture the social.
As her aspect too. So,
Also.
yeah. Okay, but I think we.
It's a good definition for the physical part.
Let's just be aware of that and.
I think we define, it's a system of social-technical systems.
Yeah. But
Maybe it's still not enough for you, but for us it was the best way to include the social dimension, it's to relate it to the technical part.
I mean, this whole history, and I think we have enough time for discussion. So, this whole SDS literature, you know, this is the reference, you gave a reference of 2009, but this is started, you know, it's a 1960s product, 1970s, things like that. And it was a critique of pure technocracy, you know, where people said, okay, but technology comes from somewhere. It's not just, it didn't fall from the sky. Humans have built it, and we have made choices, you know. And at that time, their big thing was nuclear power plants and things like that. So why did we choose to build nuclear power plants instead of, I don't know what, solar or whatever? It must be a choice. People, there were interests, money, political idea, you know, so technology is not just technology. Now, at some point you have it, but it has been built. There were choices made to build this and not something else. Money was allocated here and not somewhere else. So that's where this SDS comes from. It's not technology, it's not just technology. Technology is already the result of some social elements being built into it. It has a history, you know. But sometimes we have to live with it. Now we have the power plants. Now we need to do something with it. But it still is being human made.
And it's sort of state of the art.
Yeah.
In the beginning maybe we only have coal.
Yeah.
And afterwards nuclear.
No, but I mean, even without the judgment, I mean, at that time it was very political, but say, okay, so we allocated resources to go into this direction and not into another. We could have done something else. Other things would have been possible. I mean, I mean, there is no natural trajectory of technology. You don't necessarily automatically have to end up with the atomic bomb. That's not, you know, there were other technological choices possible.
Now more than in the past.
Yeah, probably, but now we are also more aware that we can choose. Okay, good.
So yeah, this is just a little graphical representation of how we conceptualize the cities. So you have this subsystem, social technical subsystems. So as we said, these are systems by themselves because they have different components that are related with each other. If you take one apart from the whole, it's going to crash. So for example, let's say you have the water, energy, and green infrastructure. I could have represented the five, just pretty enough. But so the only thing we wanted to show here is that these are totally interrelated. For example, if you have water and energy, you need energy to maybe run your water infrastructure. You need energy to run your pumps, to run your water treatment station. And from the water, you can produce energy with hydraulics and hydropower. If you take energy and greens, so here in Seoul, they are doing biomass, so using the green material to produce energy, okay? And on the contrary, you might need some energy to run your green infrastructure.
You need to water the whole.
You need to water the whole stuff, which is this link between the two. You need to light the stuff, all the parks in the evenings. You need electricity to avoid security or other concerns. So you have different subsystems, socio-technical systems that are interrelated with each other, and it forms a whole that we call the city in analogy with system theory.
There is a very nice book, but I don't think it's translated. It's called Blackout. It's a description, and pretty realistic, what happens when the European electricity system falls apart and cannot be. So blackout happens, but they cannot restart. It's a fiction, but they do not manage to restart the whole system. Okay? And then you see how it is linked. The first thing that is problematic is not so much the electricity, it's the water. You don't have any water anymore. No more pumps, no more drinking water is flowing. So you start to have, I mean, people just don't have drinking water. Then you start to have epidemics. Then you have, it sort of shows you the whole link, everything that is related to the electricity. You start to have, I mean, transport is finished. People can still run cars, but there are no more lights, so that you have all these jams. And I mean, it's really very well done to see how the whole thing, and it's not a city perspective, it's just a European perspective, but it's pretty much chaos.
But this yeah.
Yes, I can see the system is more for country than the city. And it could be both as well. Because my point of view again is it's a whole system now. When Mr. Matthias
Oh, maybe I gave the wrong picture now.
yes, the metropolitan. About the European.
Yeah.
So I mean, there is no dimensions for the city itself. There is no border. That's
Okay.
right. There's no
border question.
Yes, I cannot find a definition for the border for the city. It could be cities, it could be the countries, it could be European countries, America, Alaska. It's all the world.
Okay.
And the future
Good, Rashid. I think you're really raising an important point with which we have struggled a lot. What are the boundaries of the system? I mean, that's the problem of this whole systems theory. Where are the limits? Where are the boundaries of the system?
Because yes, system theories acknowledge the fact that every system has a boundary. So you have things that are in your system and things that are outside your system, which is outside the system is called the environment, but it doesn't really specify where you set the border. And with this system approach, if you take the infrastructure and where the infrastructure ends, I would say that we prefer to put the borders where the infrastructure ends than taking what we call the jurisdictional boundary.
Absolutely.
For example, in Dubai, you remember, I mean, you have Dubai, Sharjah, everything is connected, but it's different emirates, which creates a big problem. But at the end, it's one single system. People live in Sharjah and they work in Dubai. So they take the car, they use the road infrastructure to go from one place to another. The electricity system, you have the grid, which is the national grid of the Emirates. which again is bigger than the jurisdictional boundary of just Dubai.
No, so this is really a problem. What is the system's boundary? You know? And we think, I mean, with the infrastructures, we somehow can create some systems boundary. I mean, there is a water system, there is a transportation system. Of course, the transportation is always also connected to the national trains and the airports and things like that. But I think you could still sort of make a boundary and say the majority of the trips are inside of that system. That would be the boundary. But this boundary has, and this boundary has nothing to do with the political boundaries or the jurisdictional boundaries. It's a systems boundary, and that's one of the big governance issues, is that the system, the socio-technical system boundary has nothing to do with the political, established, legislative, jurisdictional, you know, governance structure. I mean, that's one of the big challenges that we are facing here. But yeah.
That's an important point.
Yeah. Okay.
So now from this conceptualization of the system, and we started to touch base on this with the blackout that Matthias was mentioning, we derived three main performance dimensions that are efficiency, resilience, and sustainability. So depending on which part of the system you look at, you can derive performance dimension. So there are three ways of looking at things. So the system, which is composed of several elements, and even though these subsystems are interrelated, you take them separately. You have the system as a whole functional body. So really for that dimension, you really look into the interrelatedness of the infrastructure. And the last one is the system in relation with its environment. So with what is outside the boundary, what is not in the system.
Okay, so what we have tried to do, you know, is, I mean, we will use three buzzwords. Efficiency, sustainability really is a buzzword. I mean, everything is now sustainable or not sustainable. I mean, it doesn't, I mean, that's why we want to justify. I mean, why are we still using the words that basically have been so much overused, and we will define them thanks to system theory. So we will use the word sustainability, but we give it a meaning. And the new buzzword is resilience. Everything has to be resilient. The World Bank has created a resilience department. Everybody, it's the big thing now, okay? So it's another buzzword. But we try to give some sense to these buzzwords on the basis of the systems approach that we are. So we're not just say forget these words, they don't mean anything. We said, well, we can work with these words, but we really need to understand what we mean. Okay,
so if you look at the efficiency dimension, so the game here is that you take each of the layers of each of the subsystems and you try to optimize them. For example, this is still your water infrastructure. That is, you have huge leakages in your pipes, losing a lot of water. You want to optimize it. So maybe you put a more efficient pump system. Try to know using ICTs where the leakages are in your system in order to repair the pipes. For the transportation, it can be the implementation of a smart card that will make people more able to take transportation. They don't have to pay in cash anymore when entering the buses, so it might increase the velocity of the buses that are more able to respect their schedules. You can have the energy infrastructures, same, you want to optimize it. For example, you are using a certain kind of solar panels for which the efficiency could be improved. You really focus on one part, you improve the efficiency of one of these subsystems, and at the end it will improve the efficiency of the overall system. And as we will see, a way to improve the efficiency of the system is to make it smart. And this is what about the whole smart city as we understand it is about. It's making using information and communication technologies, urban infrastructure, more efficient, the way you work on them, to at the end be more efficient for the overall system. But then we come back into smart
Yeah,
cities.
we come back to that, but I think I am pretty clear today. Smart is about efficiency. It's not about anything else. It makes things more efficient. But it does not, and we'll see that, it does not make them necessarily more sustainable or more resilient or whatever. But smart is about efficient. That's what I. But we'll argue more.
Yeah. We have these three performance dimensions, and as you will see, they are totally interrelated. So if you go for one, it doesn't mean that you will go for the others, but it will definitely have an impact on the others. And efficiency might be a good way to start taking care of the problem.
So it's no value judgment. Efficiency is good. It's good to become more efficient. Okay? But that's not the solution to all the problems. Okay? Okay.
Then we were mentioning this blackout theory, but you have your city, okay, and then you have external shock. So we were mainly focusing on environmental shock when talking about resilience. Resilience applies to pretty much everything. We can talk about economic resilience, social resilience, but it's basically the capacity of a system, not of a city, of a system to recover and to reach a new stable state. So this is after the blackout, everything is destroyed, is how you rebuild your city so it's functional again. And you use the interrelatedness between the different infrastructure in order to be functional as fast as possible.
So you have a blackout, and then how long does it take the city or the system to function again? But as you said, these shocks can be anything. It can be a heat wave. It can be an economic crisis. It can be a meteorite, falling on your sky, an earthquake, whatever.
A forced migration.
Yeah, something. How resilient is that system to deal with the shocks?
And it can also be a positive shock, no? Because the other day I was talking and
Oh, okay, good point.
I mean, for example, in Brazil, the Olympics, it's supposed to be on paper positive shock, but it is an out of the ordinary. If you come to think of it, it is a shock. It's like millions and millions of dollars into this building, these stadiums. I mean, it is an out of the ordinary thing for the system or the city or in any other country. And this is the first example that comes to mind, the celebration of sporting events. But it can also be other kinds of things that don't necessarily have to be negative. Like it can also be a positive shock. Actually, it can be positive in the way you handle it. If it's
maybe that distinction is not even important whether it's positive.
It's a shock.
It's the way. It's something that destabilizes the system, and then the question is how fast, how well, how resilient is it to deal with that? So you say tons of money are flowing into the city, and it could maybe destroy the city because of corruption or something like this.
I'm not going to talk about Brazil or no. I'm going to talk about Sweden that doesn't want Olympics.
Yeah,
for example,
Just that.
it would be a shock. No, what I was trying, not to get into the politics of it, but what I was trying to say is that in any urban system, the shock doesn't necessarily have to be negative. I mean, in the end, it's all about a shock, something destabilizing the system, not necessarily negative.
No, but just to make your point, because in Switzerland they vote, but they will vote again
They don't want
whether they want Olympics,
Yeah.
and they've already voted
Brazil,
against several
Rio
times.
needs other kind of investment, social inequality.
No, in this case, in Rio,
And the argument is exactly that. It will destabilize our system. We don't know how to handle this, you know? We don't want this kind of destabilization of the
No,
system.
maybe, as you know, Madrid was competing with Rio at the Olympics. And we put a lot of money in things that we are not using right now. So the caja mágica, the magic box, which is for playing tennis, and now is only used once a year for a tennis contest. And the other time of the year, we are spending money to keep it, to security, and it's for, at least right now, it's for nothing. We are thinking about
Imagine 50
or you have
other uses to this.
the Zaragoza Expo, which was a ridiculous case, for example. So shocks.
Yeah, I think you have a very good point. I think it's, from a purely systems point of view, negative and positive, it doesn't matter. It's a shock. It's an outside thing that destabilizes the system. And then the question is, how well does the system adapt to this new system?
Zaragoza was a terrible example of adapting to that infrastructure, for example. But in other, like the London Olympics was a great example of how a system adapted to the shock of money and tourists and so on.
Maybe even in Barcelona 1992 was very good for the city.
But I don't think it's a positive, you can see a shock, because it's everything you plan, a well-timed, to absorb these things of happening.
I think the differentiation between positive and negative, it's not that much solid, because you know the Olympics are going to happen, and you know where they're going to happen. An earthquake, you don't know when it's going to happen, and usually you don't really ask for it.
But then
I think,
going to a purist definition of a shock, then that's not a shock. It would be like an unexpected shock. It's the definition you're trying to give, because shocks are in like in the dictionary definition, it's like a thing that puts a system out of balance for a minute, even if it's planned or not. Like I can plan for 2 years to run a marathon, but the day I run the marathon is going to be a shock. I mean, I am, even if I'm prepared for it. So I wouldn't exclude these types of predictable shocks out of the definition. They don't have to be negative, in my opinion. They can be, or shocks, for example, as in government institutions changing, or I mean, there's a lot of things that can put the system into shock, even if they're planned or not.
And I think it's a limit of this whole system language also. We see some limits, you know, I mean, in the sense, I mean, it's very intuitive, and, you know, but then, you know, what constitutes really a shock for the system? So you could even plan it, and it's still a shock, you know?
but I think there is, and what we retrieved from the Mexico module, so we went to Mexico and we said it's the ability of the system to recover from a shock. And after the module, we said that there is something missing. It's the idea of stress, which has a different time limit. I mean, for example, cities that are subject to drought, it's total. I mean, you're not gonna handle it the same way as an earthquake. An earthquake stands 1 minute, then everything is broken. A drought can last for 6 months. So the idea of stress is also to, I think, included in this.
Okay, just hypothesizing. If you would take Dubai, for example, and suddenly a monsoon comes into Dubai and then it rains.
Sandstorm.
No, but just out of the something ridiculous, which would be good for Dubai to have so much water. It's gonna put it into shock. You can't handle it, but it's a good shock. I mean, it should be a good shock. It should be.
It should be, but
like these planned events, or most of the time they should be good. Like Athens is another terrible example of Olympics. They should be good shocks, but they're not. And stress, definitely. Come on, there's cities in the world. No city is prepared to gather so many people, even if they plan for 3, 4, 10, 12 years. It still puts the system into stress, even if it's planned, like transportation and even housing. I mean, where are you gonna? So I don't know, the definition of shock
But
doesn't have
it's
to
good
be
to question
negative.
it. It's
It
good
doesn't
to
have to
question
be a
the
meteor
concept,
or an earthquake. It can be an event,
I think that
civil war or whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be like this.
I think that the positive, if I could say, things about this kind of shows is the creativity. That is I think the best, one of the most opportunities, the best opportunities to challenge creativity, and the other one is maybe the infrastructures that are left after reconstruction of.
But also the peoples. I mean, that's what, there was a little reflection after the Paris attacks in November. And somehow the official system didn't work, but the
But
people
the
started to
citizens,
help each other and.
We have in Mexico a sentence that said, "Lo que no te mata te fortalece." It's like, it's something that
If it doesn't kill you, it strengthens you.
I say that,
It's not positive, but
this is unfortunate, but something positive comes up after negative shocks. So maybe some cities need that negative shock to recover. It's a long-term thing, but
So there is, maybe I can make the link here, because there is a debate in the literature. I mean, we cannot, basically say, is resilience about restoring the initial state? It's sort of, okay, we get a shock and then we function again. Or is resilience more than that? It's also about learning and transforming. I mean, what is it? It's, yes, the system will not come back to its original state, but it is capable to evolve to the next level thanks to the shock. So I would like the second definition more, but this is sort of, we're talking about quite abstract things, but we I think it's still a good conceptualization of what we are trying to do, and I think it's something like this. The city as a system will, I mean, big immigration or something, and it will have to deal with it. You cannot go to the previous state, or there is a drought, and you will have to live with the drought, or I don't know what, So the system has to evolve. It cannot just come back to the initial state that was before.
I just to follow up, I mean, I do understand why the immediate, talking about the system definition, the immediate thing to think about a shock is that it's a negative or positive. I understand, but in the end, what I'm just trying to say earlier is that it's rather something that puts you out of balance, like it puts the system to a test, even if you've been planning for it or not, even if you can predict it or not. Because in the end, if you think of, if in Barranquilla is going to be a huge pre-Olympic game, so that's why I have the idea in my mind. And we're trying to plan for it, but still. For Athens, the Olympics was a shock. It was like a terrible, terrible, possible, worst case scenario outcome. In Rio, it looks like it's going to be the same. So even if it's planned and predictable, it's still going to be a shock that's going to put the system out of balance. It is. I don't know if the word shock or not. It's going to be an event that's going to test the system.
The resilience of the system.
So, for example, Athens or Zaragoza with the Expo weren't resilient at all because they suffered this event, which they could have planned for better. And in the end, it didn't recover, and then there's like this, it's not even a white elephant, it's like a huge horde of elephants sitting in the middle of Zaragoza. So I do agree with the idea that unpredictability is just easier to deal with in conceptualizing, but in the end, you could I stretch out the idea a little bit and factor in some other events, even if they're planned or not predictable.
I think to conclude this, you could say it's positive. We know whether it's positive or negative only after. If the system is capable of learning and improving, then the shock was after all positive, even if it was, an earthquake or something. if the system is worse off after than before, then it probably was a negative, even though it was planned and maybe good intentions and everything, you know, something.
I was reading a book recently about the gold rush, the California gold rush, and it should have been something really positive. I mean, millions of people coming and industry, and it turned out it wasn't, because it was a boom. And so I would stretch out the idea of shocking to, I don't know, events or destabilizing events in a good or bad way, because the California gold rush was destabilized in a good way at one point. I mean, it was really good. But in the end, the city was not resilient enough to be able to adjust to this booming economy. So actually having like a dramatic growth of economy could end up being a really bad thing if the city is not resilient. You could just,
Okay, do you want like 5 minutes break or? What do you want? I mean, we're about halfway. I need 5 minutes break.
Let's do 5 minutes.
Just for you.
Yeah, just for you. Let's continue.
So the last performance dimension that we retrieved from this system theory approach is the sustainability dimension. So it's basically how your system deals with the environment and how you can minimize what you take from the environment and what you give back to the environment. So as we briefly explained, these 3 performance dimensions are interrelated. Okay, so if you go for resilience, which is a lot about redundancy, when you want to avoid blackouts, for example, you're going to build extra electricity lanes in order to be able to function again in a quick manner. So if you're redundant, you are not really efficient, because you're going to invest more to duplicate the typical infrastructure, and efficiency is a lot about minimizing the economic. If you go towards sustainability, you're not going to be very efficient. For example, if you take solar panels, so the efficiency of solar panels is 15% compared to coal that is 60%. So going towards sustainability might not really be the most efficient. But this works quite well in this sense. And then we can discuss, of course, but being more efficient, you directly are more sustainable. Because if you're more efficient, you're going to consume less, which means you're going to impact less your environment, so being more sustainable. So this is a short-term impact relation, okay? And from being sustainable, if you look in a long-term perspective, and this is really about just environmental aspects. No, I'm just saying, but if you're more sustainable, the long-term impact is to have less impact on the environment, so to have less impact on climate change. So being more sustainable, you might decrease your need to be resilient. Am I being followed or not? So this path makes sense compared to the other one. So it's good to start with efficiency, because as we will see, you have impact then on the 2 other dimensions. I guess you want to,
Yeah, okay, go for that. I think some of it we have already said, so those are, so this is just the same way of presenting what we did before. So this is, okay, so this is what we said. I mean, Maxim had his 3 layers. So this is the same in the sense that we optimizing the subsystems, and that is about efficiency, and we think that we're now moving that this is what smart city concept is all about. But we'll come back to that. Then interacting the system interacting with its environment, that's the question of sustainability. How long-lasting can the system be? And then the system self-organizing itself, dealing with the shocks, that would be the resilience. It's just another way of presenting things. But it's the point that I mentioned before, when we are using these buzzwords here, and we could be criticized for doing just like everybody else. We talk about smart city and efficiency and sustainability and things like that. But I think we have an argument here why we can use these words in this context. Okay? And now comes the point, we're moving now into smart, comes the point that, smart city is about, so smart city is about optimizing the subsystems and maybe even the whole system. And we are using the information and communication technologies for optimization purposes. That's what we're going to talk about. But the point we want to make here is that the ICTs, you can also use them for sustainability, and you could also use them for resilience. Okay? So it's not necessary. That's not what IBM does, but when they promote the smart city or Cisco or whoever, okay? But in my view, and that's what you said, cognitive cities and things like that. I think there is more in the potential of the ICTs than simply making things more efficient. It's clear that ICTs can be used for that, but I think there is more if people, self-organizing, when people start to organize, let's say we have an earthquake or some other shock to the city, and people start to organize themselves with the smartphone and things like that. I think that's something else. That's also a usage of the ICTs, but for a different purpose, though. So we'll come back to that, especially on Wednesday, when we'll talk about cognitive and other uses of the ICTs.
Okay, so I think just for the resilience, when we visited the disaster center in Istanbul, so they were explaining that one of the first things that they do when a disaster happens is to deploy communication trucks with antenna, because now, of course, water is maybe the most important infrastructure. Then you want to look into energy and everything, but communication comes just on top of everything, which is an application of how ICTs can help for resilience.
Okay. Now we come to the question of governance and performance. So this is, we already mentioned, so we are really going from government to governance. Okay, we're using, and this is a repetition for some of you, but governance basically means, let's say, government is hierarchical. Okay, so there is a plan, there is a decision, it's a top-down, things like that. Governance means that there are several actors, among which government, but government is just one. There is the private sector, there are the citizens, there are the NGOs, and then the question is, how do these actors organize them? The technical word is coordinate themselves, or how are they coordinated to solve a problem? Or in our case, how do they coordinate for efficiency purposes, for sustainability purposes, for resilience purposes? Okay, so and that's another. It's another a little bit theoretical literature, even though it's less abstract than the system theory. This is the whole literature called institutional economics and all that. But basically, the idea is none of the actors is powerful enough to organize for everybody else. Okay, so the actors need to coordinate themselves in order to address a problem. That's governance. okay? So yes, you need government because they can make laws or things like that, but if the people don't follow, if the business doesn't want to pay the taxes, you know, so nobody really is strong enough by itself to decide for everybody. That's where we are with government. So the system through which a kind of order is among several actors, okay, who are interacting with each other about a common issue, okay? So it's a problem, it's a very pragmatic definition, okay? Even though they may have conflicting interests, they need to work together. Even though they disagree, they need to work together and come to some sort of, so of course the solution may be suboptimal, but it's the one that is accepted by all the actors, okay. So here, just a little bit more into that theory. So we really have two things, okay? We have, there are two elements here. One is the actors, and actors can be an individual, a group, it can be a family, it can be an organization, any constituted thing can be an actor, okay? An actor has an interest, okay? And it can be private, it can be public, it doesn't, non-governmental, it doesn't matter, okay? And then the actors behave under rules, okay? We could add here incentives. The concept here is incentive. So the actors, they are not in a vacuum, there are some rules which make the actors behave in certain ways. Okay, you're paid for this, you're not paid for something else, you get punished if you do this, you get rewarded if you do. So there are always rules that influence the behavior of the actors. But on the other hand, the actors, they can also change these rules. If the rules are not just given, so if the actors organize themselves very well, they can change the rules by which they have to, so it's I think those are sort of, so governance is really, and we use the word governance for two things. It's, sometimes we use the word governance just for the rules. Those are the rules which define how the actors behave. And sometimes we use the word governance also for the process by which the actors elaborate the rule, okay? The rules. So those are the two, but this is really, I mean, it's institutional economics, sometimes also sociology, okay? The view here is, it's a little bit, if you want, again, like before we discussed about the limitations of system theory, you can also talk about these kind of limitations. For example, this there is no ethics in here, for example, okay? So it's just, okay, actors, they have an interest, but the rules dictate what they do or not. I mean, they may want to do illegal things, but maybe they don't want to go to prison. So the rules are strong enough, but if the rules are not strong enough, they still may do it, you know? So it's self-interested actors. But maybe I should say here, it's sociology more than economics. For economists, the only thing that motivates actors is money. For sociologists, there are more things than money. Money motivates the actors, power motivates the actor, reputation motivates the recognition, motivates, you know, so I'm more of a sociologist here. I don't think everything is about money. I think the vision of economists is too narrow. Okay? There are other things that motivate actors, but it's still the same view that actors are self-interested. They motivate, they want to be richer or more power or better recognized or loved by somebody or things like that. That motivates their behavior. Okay? And the rules incentivize that. Okay, so now, so I don't know how to choose it. So now we have this, and here you will see the national government. So this is actually one of the early conceptualizations we did, but we have never really been able to improve this. We wanted to make it more detailed, but then it never really happen. So let's say this is the urban system. Okay, whatever the system boundaries are. We said before we don't know exactly what the system boundaries are. But what we know is that the city government is inside the system, and there may be, after I come back, there may be more city governments than one in that system. But that, let's say. And then the infrastructures and the infrastructure services providers are inside that system. But they can be public or private or, you know, PPPs or concessions or an urban public enterprise that provides the transport or several or whatever, okay? They provide the services. And then there is a national government. I mean, we didn't exclude it because the national government is still there. I mean, in many countries, the national government collects the taxes, which then gives it back to the city government. So, you know, it's not, and the cities are trying to get their own money, but often they don't even have their own money. Okay? And then the financing actors are also outside, partly outside of the system, the banks and all the World Bank and whatever things, and some maybe they would like to link to the government, some maybe not, but I think this is sort of a simple way of the main actors in the urban system. And that is already, that leads to the whole question of the governance, okay? Now, we've added here the citizens and the businesses because they are, but I'll come back to that, they also are part of the system, and the businesses are, and the governance includes all these actors. So governance as defined before. All these actors somehow have to collaborate to produce efficiency, sustainability, whatever they do. Okay. Now, here we get into the performance of the urban infrastructure systems, that, as we said, efficiency and resilience. Okay. So we can measure, ideally we would have indicators of, and we have, you know, I mean, there is this, these people in Toronto, City Index, how was it called? See, I think you can Google it, City Index, it's a World Bank thing. They collect all the indicators that all the cities in the world are using to measure everything, okay? So you have nice indicators on percentages of water leakages, of I don't know what percentage of the population is connected to the electricity grid in which city. So the problem with these data is it's totally uncomparable because everybody else has, but it's a huge cemetery of data that they have collected on all the performance measures, whatever exists, okay? And then you could sort of link it to efficiency and sustainability and do a lot of things with it, but okay. And then I think this is not yet the result. I mean, we can measure that, but ultimately what counts, the performance of the urban infrastructure systems is not the same as the performance of the cities. The performance of the urban infrastructures is necessary for the performance of the city as a whole, but the infrastructure is still not the totality of the performance of the city. And here, I think we are much less precise. I mean, we sort of, in IGLUS, we sort of stop here. We don't really talk about the quality of life. I mean, that would be even more difficult to measure. There are attempts, you know, there are people who try to measure quality of life. We have all these comparisons of cities, you know, the most livable city, the greenest city, the happiest city, Now I have this PhD with Zurich, the most digital city in the world, you know, whatever. I mean, I'm ridiculing a little bit, but no, this is more serious. But I think, I mean, this is not by accident I wrote these three things, but I think you have sort of three elements really. One is quality of life. Now, regardless of how you measure this, but I mean, cities want to offer a good quality of life. But what is in there? Jobs, education, health, air quality, you know, prosperity. Okay, but okay. Then I think cities want to be attractive, You want that, you don't want the refugees, you want the well-educated people, you want to be attractive for the businesses, you want to be, you know, I think that's not exactly, of course, quality of life and attractiveness are linked, but they're not exactly the same thing, okay? And I think the third big element here is competitiveness. We haven't talked much about this, but it pertains to what we said before. I mean, since we are really in the context of globalization, all these big cities are competing against each other. I mean, they all, more or less, all do the same thing. They're competing for the big companies, the talent, and so the competitiveness of this, again, what is part of competitiveness? Quality of life is probably part of competitiveness, but also salary level, the nature, I don't know, the prosperities, all these kinds of things. So I think, I mean, our point here, this is not really IGLUS. We would stop here, but of course, the efficiency, the sustainability, and the resilience of urban systems has a direct influence on the quality of life, on the attractiveness and the competitiveness of the city, ultimately. Okay. And then we have the citizens and the businesses that feel that, or they react to that, and then hopefully, I mean, in the ideal view, you know, there is a feedback. This is traditional political science, you know. The citizens will vote for the government, which then will change this, and then if it doesn't work, then it will be improved. I mean, but I mean, we know it's not exactly working like this, but still, I mean, there is something said to it. I mean, if the business is totally unhappy with the competitiveness and the quality of life, it will probably quit. There will be less tax revenues, there will be less money for the infrastructures, you know, and so that, I mean, at this abstract level, I think you can say that at least that's how we conceptualize the whole thing. But we in IGLUS, we would be interested in this, you know, but maybe not talking about this, but sort of this, the governance of large urban systems. And we would say, okay, this is for the performance of the city, but that's not really that's not really our topic, the performance of the city. So I think that's something, I think we leave this to the consulting firms. Okay. Any reactions or I mean, what is wrong with this?
I have a question. Why this arrow is coming just from the urban infrastructure and infrastructure service providers? This efficiency, sustainability, and resilience could not be for all the governance.
No, I mean, the performance that you retrieve at the end is a result of the overall governance system. So it's not just coming from the urban infrastructure.
No,
because the service provider is selected by the government through
or there's a private operator, you know, it's the result, the government, okay, I see the arrow, we should have an arrow from that red circle down. Okay, good point. It's the governance of this which will determine how efficient, how sustainable, and how resilient it is. Okay, good. So now let's go into smart city. Okay, so I think, again, a little bit of background. So what is the phenomenon? I think there are sort of, I mean, the background is the ICTs, the information and communication technologies. And the reality is that we increasingly have everywhere, I mean, we produce data absolutely everywhere, okay? And I don't think it's a, sorry, I think this is a, in my view, this is the same technology all over the world. Of Of course, there's a difference between Kinshasa and Seoul, but they have probably more cell or the same amount of cell phones in Kinshasa than they have here, okay? So you have sensors, RFIDs, near-field things, cameras. What did I read the other day? How many cameras in the UK? 30 million cameras? I think 30 million cameras, right? Huh?
30,000, right?
30 30 million in the whole country.
Exactly.
So I mean, okay. The users themselves generate data, okay, all your cell phones, everything, whatever. Each time you pass with your card somewhere, users generate data. Then you have all these autonomous systems that are generating data. I mean, I'm putting drones, but that will become more. Your smart meters, everything, your water meter generates data. And then, you know, so I think that's the first phenomenon. So I think we generate data to the point that we don't know what to do with the data. But that's another question, okay? But this is really exponential. And then the second element is, of course, the computing power, okay? The storage capacity of these data, the transmission capacity of these data, and then also the price and the accessibility of these data. Okay? I'm not going into, some of you wrote in the paper, privacy and all that. At this point,